Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Champagne. I'm the director for the Center for Digital Scholarship at Brown University Library, and I'm the PI of the project we're presenting. I'm here with my colleagues Hilary Wang and Andrew Major, who work in digital archiving at Brown. And our talk today is called Gone in Adobe Flash, Preserving Computational Electronic Art for Future Generations. The title of the talk highlights Adobe Flash, one technology that reached its end of life recently. And this project that we're presenting is creating preservation models for 5 innovative born-computational artistic works that also rely or will soon rely on technology that has also reached its end of life. Here we're thinking Chrome browser extensions, JavaScript packages, things like that. The reason this project came about was in conversation with John Cayley, a really important figure in the electronic literature space and a professor of media arts at Brown. The program at Brown produces incredible art every year, and yet there's often no plans for long-term stability of these projects. And I thought the library needed to do something about that, so I wrote this grant, and the project is now funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. This talk will go over 3 things: the problem and opportunity in preserving these artistic works, the artists themselves that we're working with, and the future directions for the project. On this slide, you'll see a floppy disk and a CD, both of which are now not commonly used anymore. And on the left, you see print works that are hundreds of years old, such as Phyllis Wheatley's To the University of Cambridge in New England, of which we have originals at the Brown Library. The preservation of the digital works is immediately understood as a problem. In the artistic space, though, it's not just about preserving necessarily the content on a floppy disk or a CD, or whatever the platform or software is, but about preserving the work itself and the importance of that work for the author. So if we say scraped an entire Mac computer of an important artist, we still might not get a good sense of what the author's process of writing was like, or what works mattered on that Mac computer. The author may have used electronic post-it notes, for example, for good use, and you wouldn't know that even if you had it from the computer. So the preservation approach for this project is to work directly with the artist and what matters to them about the work, and then we work to develop a preservation approach that will work for them. I want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of work in this area. Acid-free bits is a great work from 2024 that was really exploring the same issue. And there are others, such as the Digits white paper, and NYU Libraries has also done a lot of great work in this area. When John Cayley and I were talking about what artists should be accepted for this project, we purposefully chose works that didn't have any preservation models that currently existed. While this project is new, at least one author that we're working with is based on the very historic history of Brown in this area. So you may have heard of Shelley Jackson's Patchwork Girl. It's a canonical, incredibly important electronic literature work that was created at Brown, written in story space in the 1980s. And even when I was taking my qualifying exam during my PhD in 2014, Patchwork Girl was required reading, but we had to go to a special lab to even see it because it was on a CD. So the first goal for this project is to work with the artists to build the preservation sketch with them. And we started this project by asking the artists what matters to them. The responses range from Alison Parrish, who wrote the Gutenberg Poetry Corpus, who said, I don't care that my work is preserved, but I want others to use it. And so then we had to build the model around the question of how do you preserve code in the best possible way, to somebody like Todd Anderson, who wrote an Experience, which is art on a Chrome browser extension. And he said, what stops me from not producing more work in this area is not knowing if it will last. And so we take what's meaningful to them from these first interviews and then develop a model on how to preserve it. We then make sure the metadata works well with other cultural institutions and make sure to document that. So we're working specifically with the ELMSIT Knowledge Base Electronic Literature Organization, Yale's Emulation as Service Infrastructure, and we also visited the Trope Tank at MIT. And then we document the models. It's not enough to just preserve the works in the way that we choose. But we want to make sure that we have a project website, a white paper that will be forthcoming in May, and we try to do general publicity about the project. This slide just summarizes the work we're doing from developing the preservation models to ultimately publishing the preserved works. And while I won't talk about all 5 of the artists we're working with, I want to list all 5 here. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Andrew Major, and then Hillary Wang, who will talk through 2 of the models we're working with.
Thanks, Ashley. Our first example work is Forever Gwen Brooks by artist Lillian Yvonne Beecham. It is a piece of web-based dynamic poetry. The challenge with preserving it lies in the fact that it changes significantly between viewings. A version of the poem is created upon loading the website in the browser and is lost once the browser is refreshed, only to be replaced by a significant or completely new instance that is structurally related but significantly different from the first. An essential feature of this work is its ephemerality. Capturing and preserving it in the form of a static media, such as a PDF or a web crawl, would lose this defining feature. Our colleague Patrick Rashley used this relatively straightforward preservation scenario to explore a principle called code resituation, introduced by Dina Engel and Johanna Phillips in their 2017 electronic media review paper. Can you go to the next slide, please, Ashley? Their approach of code resituation applies to the preservation principle of minimal intervention, commonly applied to physical artifacts, to the computer code. It seeks to minimize the invasiveness of code migration by preserving the original artist's code or significant parts of it, while adding restoration code to reanimate the defunct code to full functionality. Next slide, please. The code underlying Forever Gwen Brooks is quite simple, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And unlike other works being preserved under our project, the code and technologies lend themselves to preservation relatively easily, as these file types have proven stable. The work consists of a single HTML file with a link to a standard JavaScript library called jQuery. The dependency on jQuery is the one feature of the artwork that resists long-term preservation. jQuery is a complex library that was a once popular tool to fill in significant gaps in early JavaScript versions. JavaScript has since grown, and consequently, jQuery use is on the decline. This work relies on 2 lines of code in the jQuery library. Can you go to the next slide for me, Ashley? There we go, thank you. So in order to prepare Forever Gwen Brooks for long-term preservation, we chose to remove the dependency on jQuery using the principles of code resituation and create a jQuery proxy code to replace the almost 11,000 lines of code in the jQuery library. Hillary will introduce our second example.
Thanks, Andrew. Actually, I think you'll have to hit play for that to start. So yeah, now we're going to talk about one of the more challenging works of the grant, Unexperienced by Todd Anderson, created in 2017. Unexperienced is a narrative-based Chrome extension that tells the story on top of the Chrome browser as the reader navigates the internet. Anderson describes these augmentations as interventions that appear as banners, embedded content, a happy animated kite that kind of flies across the screen, and there's also a music component. So how do you go about preserving a browser extension and all the possible pages of the internet that could trigger these interventions? Next slide, please. So first we started with what is a browser extension? A paper published in 2021 by the Dutch Digital Heritage Network called Web Browser Characterization, Emulation, and Preservation defines the browser extension as part of the web browser that extends its functionality by providing integrations or modifications to the user interface, such as styling of the web page or grammar checks, think Grammarly. And this very simplified diagram represents the components when thinking about preserving an extension. It's the extension code that talks to the browser's user interface, and then the browser engine that is processing the internet to be displayed in that Chrome browser. So what is our preservation approach for all these different components? Initially, we experimented with web archiving, but that predictably did not work. Then our colleague Cody Carvel has been experimenting with using the EASY platform, also known as Emulation as a Service, supported by the Yale Library, to import a current instance of Chrome browser. I believe at the moment of this talk, we're using version 119.0.6045 into the emulated environment with Unexperienced, the extension installed. Experimenting being the key word because we are running into a few roadblocks trying to get Windows 7, 10, or 11 to run in EASY. But all that aside, one thing that is missing from this diagram here that you may be wondering is how do we connect to the internet? How do we browse web pages? So another approach, next slide, we're at the beginning stages of exploring at the suggestion from the team over at Rhizome and Conifer is linking that Chrome artifact with Unexperienced installed to a web archive via a proxy. There's more to come as we keep experimenting, but I'll pass it back to Ashley for some wrap-up thoughts.
Thank you, Hillary. So while we focused on models that are useful for our specific artists that we're working with, the grant originally was written to make sure that the models were useful very broadly. The reason we had to focus on the original artists is because we realized it was quite complex to work with these specific works. And so a good future direction for this project is really to see if this scales. We want to make sure these models work for independent artists and cultural organizations alike, but that is untested. And so finally, I just want to also thank the team. There are a lot of us, and not all of us could be here. And so everyone is listed here. Please do check back on the project site for the full preservation models that'll be ready around summer of 2024. Thank you.